Let's talk about the polyphonic staff, or as I like to call it, superimposed voices. This is a concept that comes up fairly early in a classical guitarist's upbringing, and so I hope you find this segment useful with whatever you may be working on. I'd like to use this piece by Johann Caspar Merz called First Exercise on the E string. Don't let the title confuse you, it absolutely requires all 6 strings. There's just a lot of action on that first string. Let me run through it for you. If you've never seen music notated this way, you may think that it looks like the rhythms don't add up at all. Let's take a closer look at that first measure. So first we should note that this is in common time or 4/4 time, meaning we should only have 4 quarter notes total in each measure. And if we look at the notes with the downward facing stems, we'll see 4 quarter notes right there. So our measure should be full. But now if we look at the notes with the upward facing stems, we'll find 8 eighth notes, which is also a full complete measure, which means we have twice as much information as we should have in this measure. The way we're supposed to interpret something like this is as though there are 2 separate things happening at the same time, or 2 voices superimposed on top of one another within the same staff. Think of it like a duet where one person plays this, and another person plays this. You may be thinking, well, what's the point of making this so complicated? Why don't we just notate it like this and call it a day? And that's a valid thought, but there's a reason. The reason is that this type of notation gives the performer much more information. It tells him or her that these bottom notes with the down stems are quarter notes specifically, and that they are to be held for a full beat and that there's no space between them. If we only notated it like this, that's not clear, and we might end up playing like this, which sounds much worse. So that extra information was really important. It also tells the performer that these notes are the more interesting parts. Let's say you perform this piece in public and you knock it out of the park, as I'm sure you would. When the audience leaves the theater, they're probably not going to say, wow, that was a fantastic performance. I really loved that one part where he played this. Not very catchy, but they might say, I loved that one part that went. So that part is being highlighted with the stems as well. Let's take this a step further. And that step further is conveniently located in the very next measure where we have 3 voices superimposed on top of one another. Here's what that measure looks like. Let's break that down part by part from the bottom up. The lowest note we have is a whole note A. That takes up the entire measure. Next, above that, we have a little melody in a middle voice, which starts with a quarter rest. And then there's 3 quarter notes, so it should come out like 1, 2, 3, 4. And then finally, Merz fills in all the ands of the beats with E's, and together we get this. Now you might be wondering, where did that quarter rest from the middle voice go? And that's a good question. Technically, it should be right between that 8th rest and the whole note, but it isn't. Because Merz made sure to include the middle voice notes in the top voice as well by putting 2 stems on the middle voice notes, we don't really need it. That 8th rest occupies the first half of beat 1. The following E occupies the second half of beat 1, so it should be perfectly clear to the performer, even without the quarter rest, that the quarter note C is on beat 2. That's why these notes appear in both voices. This method of notation is so important for classical guitar, as it's what allows us to accomplish the illusion of doing many things at once. I know that when I first started to include classical playing into my guitar life, part of what really attracted me to the style was that ability to control all of the parts in one convenient location. I hope that you found this segment informative, and best of luck.
Hello. Now I would like to talk about how to feel more independence in the fingers of the right hand. I will give you a couple of exercises. So we place the fingers on the strings, and we stroke. Yeah, but really try just to feel, really relax the other fingers. And now, let's move the other finger. We place the index again in the string, and then we move the M. And now we do the same exercise now with the A, ring finger. Perfect. Now we will start with the thumb and an index finger. And try to place these two, the ring and the middle finger, in a very relaxed way. Try to be aware of the energy here. Good. Now let's play these two fingers. Finally, these two. Good. We will play now the thumb and the middle finger. Yeah? So. Remember to feel really relaxed in the other fingers. Okay, and finally we will play the ring finger and index. So we place all the fingers on the strings. Another idea of freedom of movement is to be able to play any chord with any string on the guitar. So we will place the fingers on the strings, and we will move first the thumb. So the thumb will pluck the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th, and this will remain stable. Really easy. Now we will do the same exercise, moving now the index finger. So we will place the thumb on the 6th string, and the ring finger in the first one, and the middle finger on the second. And we will move the index like this, playing the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Just play like this for a while. Now we can try to do the same thing with all the fingers, like. Yeah, so it plays 3rd, 4th, 5th, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Very good. Now we will practice the middle finger. So for that we will place the thumb on the 6th, the index on the 5th, the ring finger on the 1st. So we will just place the fingers first, and the middle finger will play the 2nd string, 3rd, and 4th. Again. Very good. Now let's play all the fingers at the same time. We will practice the movement of the ring finger. These 3 fingers on the last strings. Yeah? and we will move first just the finger. So now let's try with all the fingers together.
I'm back to talk some more about your left hand and to build upon the ideas I showed you last week. Just to recap, I talked quite a bit about sort of the alignment of the hand, straight wrist, keeping the hand concave, fingers curled, where to generate force from these big knuckles, and how much force to generate, which is not very much. And I gave you some exercises in order to sort of build that awareness. So hopefully you're familiar with those. So this sort of stuff is all fine and dandy to do when you're playing one note at a time, as we were last week. But often on the guitar we need to press on that sweet spot that I was talking about and make sure we're not touching the other strings. So let's sort of do a little exercise that makes sure we are clearing those other strings. So let's start on the 5th fret of the B string. Once again, keeping that curled position and going from here. And let's first make sure that we're not touching the E string. So if you hear any of this, muted, or even a little sound, you're going to need to adjust the angle to make sure you're coming down in the string vertically. So let's do 5th fret, 6th, 7, 8, and so forth. You get the idea. You can do this all over the fretboard. I like to do it with one finger down at a time. I generally like to have as few fingers on the fretboard as possible, but depending on your teacher's approach, they may encourage you to leave the 4 fingers down, which certainly has its own benefits. Good. Now you can do this anywhere and get creative, maybe even make up your own little exercise, or we could play the beginning of Leyenda down here instead of up here. Don't have time to really go in, but if you like the sound of that, get your teacher to show you. It's drilling in the same concept I just showed you. You have to really be on the tips, on the G string, so that you're clearing the B string, but perhaps sounds a little more nice than this. I don't know, depending on your taste. I like both. Okay, now, switching gears entirely, let's talk about the thumb. So, common problem is sort of pain, tension, and squeezing within the hand. Big reason I'm showing you this is to alleviate the pressure in your thumb. So why don't we just take 5, 6, 7, 8, 5th position, any string. You may notice I'm not even pressing with my thumb. I'm still trying to make sure my hand is sort of concave, fingers are curled, moving from here. And I'm able to do it. I'm able to play the notes without the thumb, which shows you, okay, I don't need it for pressure. But sure, it still feels sort of unstable and like a little much like I'm going to fall off at any moment. So let's just put the thumb there very gently. We're not going to push. We're not going to squeeze. We're not going to do anything tense like this. It's just there sort of as an anchor for support so that our fingers have something to push into, but we're not pushing back. Okay? Hopefully that's clear. Next little thing regarding the thumb is you may have been told, rightfully so, that your thumb should sort of be placed somewhere around between the 1st and 2nd fingers. Hopefully you can see the tips of my 4 fingers right here and the thumb. That is absolutely right. But for me, I find that if I press with the very flat part of my thumb, this thumb pad right here is very tight, very tense. And I notice particularly when I'm playing for long periods of time, that's where my hand starts to get sore. Tiny little thing. This is again a little David Leisner trick. If you just rotate a little bit to the left bony side, super soft and squishy now, and my hand just feels like it could make music all day, which is much better than hurting all day. So, if you're ever feeling tightness in this little thumb pad, which is pretty common, try that, just rotating a little bit to the left on the bony side, okay? Last thumb concept. When I was doing these chromatic exercises, I never really told you what to do with your thumb last week. So if some of you were squeezing too hard and keeping it in place, as you went up the string, see my thumb's not moving, And what happens if my thumb doesn't move? Uh-oh, by the time I get here, look at my hand. Does that look like the good shape, the nice natural concave shape I'm trying to teach you? No. So, you can, when you're doing your chromatic exercises or any scale or any little melody, be aware that your thumb, because it's not pressing too hard, should be able to move with the rest of your hand. So if you then go through a chromatic scale and let your thumb drop, it's way down here now. Might feel a little strange at first, but my fingers are thanking me. They're much, much more comfortable pressing these frets here now. Great. Okay, so now, just to remind ourselves of these concepts for today, let's go to a good old C major chord. I find this is a good chord to practice this stuff because it's actually a bit awkward to play. Just a nice PIMA arpeggio. We're going to make sure the G is clear. We often hear a lot of this in C major. So adjust that angle like we did in the very first exercise. Make sure you're clearing the other strings. And I would then encourage you to sort of check your thumb. Okay, is it tight? Maybe rotate it a little bit to the left. Okay? Make sure the thumb is relaxed. And this awkward chord for many guitarists, if you sort of memorize what your wrist, fingers, and thumb need to be like in order to make it sound properly and feel comfortable, it'll make your life a lot easier because we see this thing a lot. Okay, so any sort of exercise built around C major, I'm not going to delve into specifics. I just like to do PIMA and then maybe take a few beats to adjust what needs to be fixed. And there you have it. Okay, so just to recap, we did sort of little exercise, focusing on that sweet spot. Talked a little bit about some thumb tips. It can move, it can rotate a little bit to relax this thumb pad. And C major, anything around C major is a good little place to apply these ideas. Good luck. See you next time.
All right, back for another session on chords. So in that last session, we talked about 6 basic chords: C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, or an A minor. Or what we can call that is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chord in the key of C major. We're talking a bit about theory, which we'll come to in a bit. So in the last session, what I talked about was, again, the fact that, of course, there's lots of different ways to play the same chord. There's also literally lots of different ways in the left hand you might want to play a D minor chord or an F major chord. Talked about the fact that F major is tricky. Don't worry, keep persevering with it. Just keep practicing it slow and steady. Thinking about some of the stuff we talked about in the last session. Next kind of thing to think about in terms of left hand technique with chord playing, and the next thing to focus on when you practice, is the concept of a couple concepts. Number one is the minimum movement principle. I say this to my students all the time, and it happens to me all the time. My fingers are like octopus fingers. So that is, when I press chords, I lift up, my fingers want to do that. They want to kind of flap around, fly around like octopus tentacles, hence octopus fingers. With that being said, what I'm trying to do when I practice, there's probably other things that I'd practice a lot, like scales. Your teachers probably talk to you about that. But what I definitely do is I do some slow chord practice, making sure that I literally just don't let my fingers octopus. So I would sit and practice C major, going to D minor, going to the E minor, go through that set of 6 chords and literally watch my left hand. Make sure that when I go from one chord to the next, I'm keeping my fingers maybe, a half of an inch off of the neck of the guitar. I'm not letting them get out of that nice curved position. I'm definitely watching my 3rd and my 4th finger. As I talked about in the last session, I'm making sure my thumb is behind the fingers to really facilitate those movements. I'm also then, minimum movement principle, I'm taking the opportunity of that time in between chord changes to try to form the shape. So what I'm not doing is playing the C chord, lifting up, wait until the last nanosecond, and then trying to find the chord. I'm playing the C chord, and as I'm moving to the D minor chord, I'll be forming the shape on the way over there. Same thing when I go from the D minor, as I'm forming that E minor chord on the way over there. The same thing then, right? So I'm always thinking about the next step ahead almost. Even in between chord changes within one beat, I'm thinking ahead as I'm playing and trying to make those fingers stay as controlled as possible. The other thing around this, which you may, again, I call them, I have what we call three things. I think of anchor fingers, guide fingers, and then common fingers. So anchor fingers between chord changes are pretty simple. If I go back to, again, these 6 chords, say I'm playing a chord progression with C major and A minor. So what do we know? C major, A minor, 2 fingers are what I would call anchor fingers. These 2 fingers don't move between your C major chord and your A minor chord. So they don't move, we know that on paper, but sometimes when we're playing, our fingers just have a mind of their own and they octopus, they come out here. So making sure if I was playing a C to an A minor, I'm keeping those 2 fingers down, what I call anchor fingers. I then have what I would call a common fingering or a common pattern. So for example, from A minor to E minor, there, if I'm playing my E minor with my second and my third finger and then going to or from A minor, there's no fingers that are anchored, all the fingers have to move, but I'm definitely thinking about keeping these 2 fingers kind of in the same shape, in the same form, in that common shape, lifting them up, keeping them close, and then lifting them over. That's the common chord principle. Common fingering principle that I think of. Then the last thing is a guide finger. So a guide finger is literally a chord that just slides up and down a string from a finger that slides up and down a string from one chord change to the next. At the moment, we don't have any of those in our 6 chords that we're dealing with. So last exercise is this, to go back to those 6 chords in that order, practice, see if you can kind of go through. Are there any common fingers or guide fingers that you can notice? The next thing though is now get out of that very rigid way of playing a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You see how many times I've talked about that? All of the little exercises that I've said to practice around that order. Now that you've thought about it that way, now you can start to break it up. Just kind of bounce around between your chords. So, for example, maybe play your C chord to your A minor. Practice that anchor finger. Then maybe go from a C chord over to the G chord. I think of almost here, the chords in like a little circle. I'm starting on C and I'm just bouncing around to any one of those chords. And again, just kind of do some assessment when you're playing. Are there any guide fingers? Are there any common fingers? Is there any anchor fingers? And if not, at least am I making sure that my fingers are staying close to the neck and staying as tight and as clean as I possibly can. So there, the first session and then today's session, this second session, I've gone through some of the really fundamental things that I think about when I'm teaching guitarists who've been playing chords for a while, but they need to kind of up their game with them a little bit. They need to get their technique a little bit stronger in the left hand. Technique strength in the left hand, there's something to be said for just repetitive practice. But when you start to think about some of those things that I've just been talking about today, that's what I think of as cognitive practice. It's not just practicing the muscle memory, it's thinking about what we're doing, thinking about really minimizing the left hand movement and then applying it when I'm practicing. That then embeds itself into the hand, and now when I'm playing chords, I'm not thinking about that stuff. That stuff is just happening in my hands. Muscle memory is there. So, happy practicing. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.